Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be continuing our exploration of the Open Sicilian. Our main focus in this video is going to be the Najdorf, and this video is going to it's going to do a deep dive on the Knight on Nbd7 variations and go into all the different sidelines that you could face within that system. So if you like videos like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and please click on your notification icon. So to get started, after e4, c5, we're going to go into our Open Sicilian. If you've seen my introduction to the Open Sicilian video, it'll give you some background on this. And also, if you've seen my follow-up video to that where I go over some of the main lines, you'll have even more background for this video. This video is just focusing on this move, Knight on Nbd7, which is one of the two main lines. And we're going to go over all of the possibilities that you might have to face from here in a repertoire if you're going to be playing my recommended move, which is bishop to g5. So, anyways, black has a lot of different options here, and you're going to have some preparation against all of them. By far and away, the main line is just to play the move knight to c5, and, just kind of go after this bishop. That's kind of the point of playing knight on Nbd7 and knight c5, is we want to get in this move while our bishop is still on the f8 square, holding the g7 pawn so that it's not tempting for white to play bishop captures e6. Although bishop e6 is actually possible under certain conditions and under certain circumstances, even if we're not picking up that pawn on g7. But in this case, for the most part, nobody's grabbing it before they play a move like bishop g5. Once bishop g5 is in play, then the move bishop to e6 just becomes much more menacing and much more dangerous. As a matter of fact, if black were to play just kind of a nothing move, like black were to play b5, and I call this a nothing move because it doesn't develop the queen, doesn't develop a piece, doesn't move the knight to c5, so it looks like a useful move because it's preparing to develop, but we've just moved a pawn, we haven't moved a piece, so now we can certainly sacrifice. And these positions are supposed to be actually quite good for white. An example would be something like queen a5. We would simply castle. And then like on b4, for instance, we would play knight d5, ed5. And there's a lot of different ways that black can defend here. So it's actually really difficult to go over every single possible defensive try for black just because there are so many. I mean, b4 was by no means forced. Bishop b7, knight d5 was also possible. So there's just so many different ways to defend. But basically we have compensation in the form of this very exposed king, and our king is relatively safe, and it's a piece for 2 pawns, so we should have more than enough compensation for the material. But a sample would be something like knight e5, and then interestingly enough, the computer gives here this kind of incredible move that leads to advantage white. The computer wants to play bishop d8, I guess with the idea of bringing this bishop back and simply threatening to play knight to c7, which is just a really goofy idea, and it's really difficult to see for me. It's difficult to understand this idea, but the computer says this is decisive advantage white, so I have to believe it. But then the other way to go, I would just say the more human approach, is just to centralize the rook, and of course this is what I've played in the past when I've had positions like this. And then there's really kind of two possibilities. They can either play king f7, or they could play bishop e6, and of course there's, like I said, there's a multitude of other defensive tries here for black, and it's just impossible to go over all of them. But just rest assured that everything leads to advantage white. But we could have bishop e6, d captures e6, and this thorn pawn on e6 is actually pretty dangerous. Queen c7, queen d5, rook c8, rook a d1 is just decisive advantage white. A sample would be something like, let's say queen c5, we would actually have rook e5 winning. So the point is obviously if queen d5, we're going to play rook on e takes d5, and if pawn takes d5, we're going to have this cute little mate in 2 utilizing this thorn pawn to its fullest potential. And that's just kind of a sample of how things can go, terribly, terribly wrong. After rook e1, they could also play something like king f7, in which case we would actually just sack for the knight. We would play queen f3 check, and we would just bring this other rook into the game. And this is actually a really, really difficult position to defend, because you can't bring back the queen, because obviously the knight is defending it. We're just threatening to, take and take all kinds of stuff, and we can't defend it the super logical looking way with a move like bishop d6, because we're going to have knight g7, queen f7, and then queen e7 is mate. So we just run into this problem of our king being in the middle and just getting mated. So That's kind of a sample of what we're threatening kind of on the spot when we play a move like bishop g5. We are actually threatening bishop e6. So black will have to do something on this turn to kind of stop that. Other moves that kind of walk face first into bishop e6 would be something like bishop e7, in which case we're going to play kind of this traditional sack. We're going to go after the g7 pawn. Now, this particular version of it, when the queen comes to b6, is a little bit more unclear because they will get some counterplay on the b2 square. Now, if the queen goes to a5, there's nothing unclear about it. If queen a5 and we were to castle kingside in this position, white's just completely winning. But with this little bit of counterplay, these positions are actually a little unclear. If, for example, queen b2, we would probably play knight d5. Bishop f8 is possible. They kind of have to find bishop f8, though. If they don't find bishop f8, their position is likely lost. So they would have to find bishop f8, and then we could castle kingside, and then queen e5 could get played. We would actually play c4 to defend the knight because the e pawn is falling and we can't really defend it. Queen e4, knight g3, queen g4, queen d2, and I'm just putting unclear here. The computer gives some kind of equal assessment here, but I mean, the position itself is just totally insane. We've sacrificed material, and this king is extremely loose, and there's basically zero development for black. So I would prefer having the white pieces here, but it's a very unclear position, and black would of course have to know enough to get here, even to just get this position that the computer considers equal. So going back, bishop e7 and b5 are both going to be met with bishop takes e6, and of course, a move like queen c7 would also be met with something like bishop to e6 is a serious possibility. But there are moves that are difficult to meet that way. For example, queen b6 is kind of an interesting attempt. And actually, I ran into this for the first time a couple years ago in the very last tournament game that I ever played that I managed to win, which I was happy about. The very last live tournament game that I played about, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. Let's call it 2.5 years ago. And I played queen d2, and then my opponent played bishop e7, and then I kind of went into a long think right here, wondering if I could take on e6, not knowing that all of this is just well-trodden theory. This has been played by players, such as Nepomniachtchi, and people have played the white side of this before. But I found the main line, which is just f3, and then we're just going to play kind of like an English attack-like setup. White doesn't quite have enough to play bishop e6 in this position because, of course, the g7 pawn can be held since we're not gaining that tempo. So it would be like bishop e6, fe6, knight e6, and then the king can simply come to f7. We're not gaining a tempo on a queen that's located on either d8 or c7 since the queen is on b6. Bishop e6 is kind of off the table. So knight c5, we're going to castle queenside, and then I found the best move, apparently, h4. And then I played g4, and then my idea was just to kind of rush the kingside, basic standard English attack principle. And then here I actually kind of make a mistake. Really, I should just keep going. I should just play something like g6 and h6 immediately. I took time to make a safety move, which is kind of a total waste. And then after b4, I think again, what's interesting is I probably, even if, for example, if instead of bishop d7, they played b4 right here, I probably could have just continued with a move like g6 and just kept attacking. There's no reason to make any defensive moves in this position for white, apparently, at least according to the computer. After b4, I could have just played g6 and had a winning attack similar to the attack I got in the game. But I played some safety moves, and then my opponent, started moving his pawns towards the queen side. I started moving my pawns towards the king side, and then finally I get the right idea, and I just ignore what he's doing. And I just go after his king. And so now here it's a difficult situation. I think black has already lost. I'm breaking through with everything. So king g7 is obviously a lemon, so he played rook f7, and then I sacked the rook, which should be a winning sacrifice. And right here I repeated the position once, and then we were both in time pressure, and I made a move that wasn't very good, but ended up winning with it. I played the move e5 check, which is just terrible. Rook g1 should be completely winning. For example, they can't play rook g7 to defend because queen f4 is mate. And if bishop d8, we have rook g6. And then this is all going to lead to mate. In the game, I actually played I'll just just to do justice to my opponent, I played a terrible move. I played e5, and my opponent played d captures e5, and then I played another terrible move. I played knight f5. And, okay, I got really lucky. Like, I actually still won the game, which is just ridiculous. Like, bishop f8 is winning for black. Like, he defends everything, and apparently white is lost. But I got really lucky. My opponent took the knight, and I had this forced sequence. I had knight g3, queen h4, queen h7, knight h5, which I somehow managed to find, and that was mate. So I got really lucky in that game. That was my very last tournament game that I played. It would have been a gorgeous game if I had found rook g1, but instead it was just kind of a messy finish and time pressure. But the strategic idea in the opening in the middle game should definitely be emulated in that game. Just playing that English attack setup with h4, g4, bishop s6, and then g5 and h5 and g6, etc. So another way that people can play after bishop g5 is they can just play the move h6, and this is definitely a move that you're going to run into occasionally. And my recommendation is just simplify your preparation. Just take it. Just play bishop takes, and again, very similar to other things. If they play, for example, queen takes f6, we can just play. We can just play something like queen d2, castles queenside, etc., and we can just kind of go from here. Normally, people play knight takes f6, and then I recommend queen e2, and then I had a game go queen c7, castles queenside here, and then I played rook he1, and if I had to do it over again, I would just start rushing with the pawns. I would play like f4, g4, h4, g5. I wouldn't bother moving the rook. But I did eventually kind of stumble onto the right plan of just shuffling my kingside pawns forward in just a blatant aggressive attack against the black king, just playing for mate. And at this point, white's completely winning. After knight f5, the game is ostensibly over. The whole point is after g takes f5 and rook h3, this bishop now has access to the f7 square, and this position is completely winning. So, for example, we just take everything, and now I played rook g1, which apparently was the right move. I found a whole series of right moves here. The whole point is I'm threatening rook g6 when I'm taking advantage of this pin, and the attack is just too much. So the game continued queen d7, and then we took here, we took here, we took here, and then my opponent resigned. If king e7, we have f8 equals queen is mate, and that's about how you're kind of supposed to play these positions. You're just supposed to play queen e2 and just basically rush on the queen side, and I would say the same thing against queen f6. If queen f6, we just play something like queen d2, and then we just rush him on the queen side eventually. This is basically the strategy, and it's a pretty simple one. So coming back to the more mainline stuff, so like they can play knight c5 in this position, and then we're going to play f4, and then we're going to have bishop e7, queen f3, castles kingside, and I discussed in the previous video about the main lines why the castles kingside plans are better than the castles queenside plans. Queen c7, and then we're going to play f5. And now here, the main line is b5. And I discussed this a little bit in the previous video where I talked about like a3, and then if they take on b3, we're going to play cb3, and these positions should be advantage white. So here we're going to discuss like what if they play alternative moves. Now what's interesting is if they play alternatives, there's actually kind of a pretty dangerous threat in this position. There was a game played between Ivanov and Noroditsky in St. Louis in 2011, and I was actually a fly on the wall in that game. I got to see that game live in person. And that game went bishop d7, and then the game continued king h1 from Ivanov. And of course Ivanov went on to win. King h1 is a very standard move. So they just kind of ended up transposing into standard ideas within that game. Like after king h8, a3 got played, queen b6, rook ad1, and Ivanov just kind of played the standard normal kind of ideas within this setup, and he ended up getting a nice little advantage with white, and he was able to convert that game. And I was kind of impressed by how well he played the Fischer Sozin. Of course, he is the grandmaster, so I mean these things were to be expected. So after the game, I was actually kind of curious about another attempt that he could have played instead of playing, this very lovely just King H1, which is kind of the move that Kasparov would favor in a position like this as well, and just kind of continuing to play the normal standard stock moves in the position from here. I was curious after the game, and I actually asked, I said, well, why didn't you try fe6, fe6, knight f5? So I thought I was being really smart by asking while they were going over it, and they were like, oh yeah, we already looked at that. So they had both already seen it, and it was a really interesting line, but then we started going over it, they started showing me because it was super interesting. And it goes bishop d8, and then queen g3, and this is what I was curious about, and then knight b3, knight takes g7. It just looks super aggressive, and I was like, I thought maybe white was winning. It turns out the position is actually quite unclear. I'm definitely, if I have this position, I'm definitely going to play it with the white pieces. It looks like it, in most situations against most opponents, this is going to lead to mate. There is some defense here, though, just in the fact that this king is on h1. It gives black this nice little check, this defensive resource. And then after king h1, this queen can shuffle to e5, and the position's really wild, but black just barely hangs on. It's kind of crazy. After bishop f4, we'd have knight takes e4, knight takes e4. Bishop h4 is a must-find defensive resource. Queen takes b3, queen takes e4, and all these moves are forced, like according to the engine. Any deviation from this, and black is going to be completely losing. So then knight h5, we have bishop c6, queen back to h3 to protect against the mate threat on g2, queen g6, and then we can take, and then they take the knight. We bring the bishop back to g3, of all moves. We don't take the rook, we bring the bishop back to g3, which basically wins this bishop on h4 because it's pinned to the queen. And then after this exchange, they're going to threaten the back rank with queen e2, and then we can cover the back rank with rook e1, and now we're picking up that bishop on h4. So then after rook f8, we would actually have to find another hard move to find king g1, just preventing the back rank threat. Queen takes c2, and now we can finally play queen takes e6, followed by bishop takes h4, but we have to actually do this in the right order. Queen e6, and then we have to bring the queen back to g4 so that when we take on h4, we're holding the g2 square. And according to the engine, this position is completely equal. If someone somehow manages to survive all those complications, this would be equality. I can't imagine why those two guys didn't see this entire variation all the way out to here. They saw more of it than me, though. so I thought it was pretty impressive that they had both looked at it. It's something that I think needs to be played at the highest levels, though. I think this is something you should be quizzing people in this, especially from what I've seen of the World Championship match games. This gives white enormous opportunities to win. It gives black enormous ways to go wrong unless he has this all completely prepped on his engine. And of course, I've seen Magnus Carlsen very comfortable with, even just this type of position with white, just continuing to play chess from here. So, anyways, so that is the positions after just kind of hanging out. If we rewind, just kind of hanging out and playing a move like bishop to d7. So that's the main thing that's going on here, is white is putting pressure on this e6 pawn, and he's trying to get black to move this pawn forward. And of course, if black chooses to do nothing with bishop d7, we can continue with this fe6, knight f5 plan. If black plays the main line with b5, we're going to continue with a move like a3, and then we can also continue with king h1. We can try to get this pawn to move forward with moves like queen h3, rook d1, etc., etc. And then we're just going to play for that kind of standard advantage that we're going to get in the main line, where we force that pawn to move forward and we gain control of the d5 square, and then we just play chess that way. So anyways, this is how you play the white pieces in the knight on b to d7 variation, and this is how you just get an advantage with white in basically all these lines. All these lines should be pretty much slide edge white. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you can use these ideas in your own games, and I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you for watching.